Hello, and welcome to Overheard, the Foreign Policy Research Institute monthly podcast that explores the national security implications of intelligence activities, irregular warfare, and political warfare. My name is Philip Wasielewski, and I am the director of FPRI's Center for the Study of Intelligence and Non-Traditional Warfare. Today, in the realm of non-traditional warfare, we are going to discuss Russian political warfare operations against two former Soviet republics and now independent states, Georgia and Moldova. I visited both countries last year, and as a result of that trip, FPRI published an article titled The Frontline States, Conversations and Observations about Russia's Other War in Europe. In that article, I stated that while Russia was waging a conventional military war in Ukraine to remove Western influence and reestablish Moscow's control, it was at the same time waging political wars elsewhere for the exact same purposes. The goal of both wars, conventional and political, is to reestablish a Russian sphere of influence in the former Soviet republics and Warsaw Pact states between the Black and Baltic Seas. Now, a year later, FPRI wishes to follow up on events in Georgia and Moldova as both countries prepare for very impactful elections. In Moldova, on October 20th, a presidential election will be held along with a referendum on whether Moldova should enter the European Union. In Georgia, parliamentary elections will be held on October 26. In both cases, internal Georgian and Moldovan politics are beset by Russian subversion to turn both votes in Moscow's favor. Today, we are going to hear from four distinguished political figures, two from Georgia and two from Moldova, who will describe in their own words the impact of Russian political warfare operations against their countries and societies. Joining us from across the Atlantic are Mr. Batu Kutelia, the former ambassador of Georgia to the United States, Mr. David Sikharulidze, the former Minister of Defense of Georgia, Mr. Valeriu Pasa, the founder and head of the Moldovan human rights organization Watchdog, and Mr. Sergehi Ostaf, a distinguished human rights lawyer and member of the Credo think tank in Moldova. Gentlemen, welcome to the Overheard podcast, and let's get right into our first question. Ambassador Kutelia, could you please briefly describe the state of politics in Georgia, what the upcoming election in October is about, and who are the main political forces involved in the election?
Thank you for inviting me on the FPRI Overheard podcast. It's a pleasure and honor, and thank you for this question, because as we all see now, considering the bigger geopolitical turmoil in the region, domestic politics are also kind of a reflection of the bigger global context what we see. So it's important to view Georgian domestic politics also in a part of the global context. And the global context is authoritarian system being assertive and being on offensive against democracy. So in this battle between democracy and authoritarianism, Georgia is on the front line, like Moldova, like Ukraine. And the leader of the authoritarian world is Russian Federation, who rallies other authoritarians as well to prove that the liberal democracy as an idea is not worthwhile, it does not work. And the Russian idea to reconstruct some kind of a geography of expanded Russian imperialism is reconstitute remnants of the Soviet Union. So that's why I think Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine is very important in these aggressive revisions. So now zooming down to Georgia, yes, these elections are very important. I think one of the most important elections that are, and one might argue that all other elections were important, but this is a watershed moment where the election is between European democratic future or post-Soviet Russian-style authoritarian kleptocratic state capture. And in that regard, of course, we have a classical political players who is an incumbent government, a Georgian Dream political party, who is one of the most pro-Russian political party, including its own satellites, different degree being either ultra-nationalist or pro-Russian or somewhere in between, but in large they are in concert trying to undermine Georgia's European future. The last 12 years been a very consistent policy from their side, but like in Hemingway's famous novel, when this guy who got bankrupted explained that he got bankrupted slowly and then suddenly. The same happened in Georgia after Russian invasion in Ukraine in 2022, when the gray zone evaporated and Georgian Dream have to project themselves as a Russian ally. So they choose side, so they had no space for maneuverability. Other political players are the pro-Western opposition, Georgia civil society, who's been constantly protesting against the authoritarian turn and the state capture, Russian style of state capture in Georgia. And the state capture is orchestrated by one oligarch, who is a made in Russia oligarch, who is a Georgian name, Bidzina Ivanishvili, and his political accomplices. And civil society, who is also having a tipping moment and understanding that this is a really watershed moment. The one important component to add to the specificity of this, let's say, standoff between opposition and incumbent was the Russian-style foreign agents law, where in a Putin's style, the same law that Putin adopted some years ago to eliminate any space of the civil society activism or opposition or the free media. And the same law was adopted by Georgian Dream, notwithstanding the warnings from our Western partners and also Georgian domestic political actors. So that is a moment when Georgian civil society also positioning themselves as a political opponents, because it's not a typical classical election that we are facing in election. So again, everyone is against the incumbent. But more importantly, as a political player, we see Russia's clear and open interference in domestic affairs. When Georgian government started copying the Russian playbook, Kremlin playbook in Georgia, Russian political leadership came publicly and commanded them doing the right steps to squeeze out Western influence from Georgia. So we have, to sum up what is happening in Georgia for these elections and who are the political players, we have state-kept informal ruling system of Russian oligarch Ivanishvili and his political accomplices. We have opposition and civil society. We have Russian interference and Russia physically present in Georgia through its money and its money laundering operations that are run in Georgia, and also their economic or political influences. And we have some kind of a Western presence as well, who's been constantly encouraging Georgia's Western aspirations and European and Euro-Atlantic integration with different successes. For example, 2008 Bucharest summit was not that encouraging when Georgia and Ukraine fell short of membership action plan. But we have a European Union who made a strategic decision, notwithstanding of wrongdoings of Georgian government, to give Georgia candidacy status. That emboldened Georgian civil society and pro-Western political actors that now there is a tangible results that we are facing, and Georgian Dream and Russians want to take it away from Georgian public. So that's where we are. That's why these elections are very important. We have a very obvious Russian interference. Even 2 days ago, Russian political leaders from State Duma, they openly said that if Georgian Dream or the Russian oligarch Ivanishvili wants to keep the power, they are ready to assist them to keep the power. So it's a openly declared interference, but stakes are very high. And just again, to zoom up on the regional level, the thing is that Georgia currently, with its geopolitical position on the Black Sea, is more than Georgia. There are a lot of other important stakes for Western interests or other regional players. So again, the stakes are high, and we have these players very active on the ground.
Minister Sikharulidze, do you have anything to add regarding the Georgian elections?
Russia has always been using political warfare tactics against Georgia to, one way or another, expand its influence over Georgia. Today we have the situation, especially right after the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, when Georgian Dream, which is the ruling party, established, ruled, and owned by Russian oligarch Ivanishvili, is openly strengthening the Russia's political warfare tools. First of all, when we speak about the disinformation and propaganda as one of these political warfare tools, we see the campaigns from the Russia that are promoting nihilism, apathy toward liberal democracy, and skepticism about Georgia's NATO EU future and integration prospects, that are pushing narratives that are shaping public opinion, creating confusion and undermining trust in democratic institutions. And we have very similar narratives coming from Georgian Dream, anti-Western and anti-liberal democracy narratives. It has become already the very the source for the jokes that every Georgian official is now pushing the narrative that there is the global, so-called global war party, and that every critic of democracy backsliding of Georgia is automatically are included into the global war party, whether it is Georgian or American or European politician. Second component is that there is political subversion, that Russia supports political parties, movements, and leaders that are sympathetic to its interests. That includes the providing financial and logistical support to these fringe parties, nationalist groups, and the populist leaders. However, nowadays we have currently 7 officially registered pro-Russian political parties in a situation when the pro-Russian public opinion is very limited, and then overwhelming majority of Georgians consider Russia as a main enemy to Georgian statehood. But nevertheless, we have 7 officially registered pro-Russian political parties that are openly operating in Georgia, most of which are closely associated with the current government, and one of them is in an open alliance, and they are running together for these current elections. The third component, that very well known and then it's very widely spread, is the Russian economic tools that exert influence, such as manipulating the energy supplies, engaging in the trade wars, imposing the economic the trade tools, using economic and trade tools to exert its influence. And over the last 12 years, due to the policies of the current government or the Ivanishvili-controlled government, Georgia's dependency on Russian market grown significantly, from zero to the point when Russia is one of the biggest trade partners. This dependency makes Georgia particularly vulnerable to economic pressure from Russia. We have better situation with regard of energy dependency on Russia, since Azerbaijan is our main energy partner. But there has been the trend to increased gasoline imports from Russia. From Russia. We cannot overlook the military posturing as well. Russia engaged in hybrid warfare while they are in violation of all international norms and the 2008 ceasefire agreement that was signed by Russia itself occupies the Georgian territories of Abkhazia and Sikharulidze region with this military presence and then the military posturing there. Therefore, it is one of the fuels, the fears of war that Georgian government instrumentalized to justify growing authoritarianism and anti-Western policies here as well.
Mr. Pasha, I have the same question regarding Moldova's upcoming presidential election and referendum on EU accession. Could you briefly describe the state of politics in Moldova and what the upcoming elections in October are about, and who are the main political forces involved in the election?
Hello, and thanks for the invitation. I will start by bringing a little bit more attention on the general Russian strategy in the area of Eastern Europe, Southern Caucasus, Central Asia. What they do now is exactly what is prescribed by the so-called Primakov doctrine, which means that Russian strategic goal is to regain effective control of the former countries of the USSR. And this is what they are systematically doing for a recent more than 15 years already. If we will look on the example of Belarus, we see the best example of Russian successful application of this strategy when a state which keeps its formal independence de facto lost its sovereignty and is fully controlled by other country, in this case Russia, including by using the territory of Belarus for the military invasion of Ukraine. In the case of Moldova, it is something additional because Moldova traditionally for many years and more intense starting from 2014 is explored as a testing ground for Russian hybrid tactics or hybrid operations, meddling in elections, illegal sponsorship of the political parties, capture of the political elites, of the administration, penetration of the state institutions, of the business elites, and justice, very important. So what we are facing now, and we are talking first of all in the first stage about presidential elections and referendum, which will be on October 20th this year. And next year, somewhere like now, in the middle of the summer, we will have parliamentary elections. All that happens immediately after Moldova achieved the status of candidate of for joining European Union and opened the official negotiations. So this is practically the only chance for Russia to block our EU membership path by a political change. That's why they are using huge resources to influence our political life, our political competition. They are illegally funding tens of political parties, hundreds of opinion makers, including some alleged civil society organizations, some individuals who are very active in spreading Russian narratives in the online space, in traditional media. Russia, of course, uses in Moldova strategic corruption. I mean, corrupting the justice system, first of all, to endless postpone any investigations against illegal funding of political parties and other illegalities. So for now, we have the pro-reformist, pro-Western forces led by President Maia Sandu. There are some smaller opposition forces, but which are all also genuinely pro-European. And we have a very diverse and big group of political actors who are to different degree subordinated to Kremlin. Of course, in its effort in Moldova, Russia is assisted by the local kleptocratic groups, and here we of course see this important similitude with Georgia, with the difference that most of the leaders of these kleptocratic groups, the oligarchs, most prominent oligarchs, are fugitive. Most of them actually ended already by hiding in Russia. I mean, Ilan Shor, the former member of parliament, the former head of the Democratic Party, Vladimir Plahotniuk, both of them are under international sanctions now. Another guy is hiding in London. It's called Vyacheslav Platon, also well known for the organization of the biggest money laundering operation in Eastern Europe and maybe even in the whole Europe. So these are somehow natural allies of Russia. Also, they use the tactics of Trojan horses when we can talk about some politicians who pretend to be supporters of the European integration, but in reality they spread most of the pro-Russian propaganda. And here, of course, we have also similitudes with Georgian Dream in Georgia. I'm talking about the political party headed by the current mayor of the capital city of Moldova, Mr. Cheban, or the former prime minister of Moldova under pro-Russian president Igor Dodon, Ion Kivu. So here I think I will stop my introduction.
Thank you, Valeriu. Mr. Ostaf, could you please describe for our audience just what the Russians are doing regarding election interference in Moldova now and what they've done in the past?
Yes, I would like to add what the previous speaker was saying about the different ways how Russia is trying to interfere and influence the voters in Moldova. And of course, the first one is Russia exploits Moldovan Russian economic exposure, so dependency of various Moldovan economic sectors on Russia, from the supplies of the various inputs from energy to other necessary inputs in Moldova, but also control of some of the retail sector or influence in owning some of the strategic companies, but also the significant presence in the financial banking sector. The dirty cash, let's say, cash that can be used in order to buy various politicians. Apart from that, they can also use the uncontrolled Transnistrian region, which is substantially economically controlled by, I would say, even the proportion of 70-75%, and that also allows them for the different farms and cyber arrangements to use the electronic money and also produce cash that could be used to buy the voters. And using these financial resources, it goes to the purchases of the votes and of the elderly people, the most vulnerable. These are quite pragmatically, technically kind of successful things to do. That's one. The second one is using another vulnerability of Moldova is that Moldovan voters are shifted towards they are less represented by various political parties, which are Euro-Atlantic. So the governing pro-European party is declared European party, Western European party, but it doesn't embrace the Euro-Atlantic, specifically NATO option. That actually shifts the whole of the Moldovan voters' perspectives vulnerable towards security issues. So the supply of the political parties is mismatched from although the Moldovans would expect more of the Euro-Atlantic options being present in political parties, the current political parties, the Western pro-European parties, they're not offering. That allows the speculation of the messages of the Russians, saying that the neutrality and then staying away, not supporting the Ukrainians against the war of aggression is an option that also speculates and grooms the so-called centrally positioned various parties who are being supported by Russia, but at the same time they're speculating on the neutrality message. Again, and when the current government is trying to be bolder in supporting Ukraine, it faces against the so-called neutrality message. So it's actually very much an influential type of message that they use. And the third one, I would say that they would use various networks of the traditional influences in Moldova, the Moldovan Orthodox Church, which is substantially dependent on the Russian one, and it passes the message on the ground through grassroots messages and the like. So that would be the three, and it is not new. That has been done before as well.
Thank you very much, Sergei. Minister Sikharulidze, could you please describe in Georgia the Russian election interference measures that have been done in the past and what the Russians are doing now as the elections in October approach?
The Russian interference in the Georgian politics and in elections in the past was really quite. They have been employing sophisticated campaigns, disinformation campaigns, and the spectrum was pretty wide, starting from disinformation and propaganda to political subversions and economic pressure, as well as the since 2008 military posturing, and also the pushing distort cultural and historical narratives, and including also the diplomatic maneuvering in many cases. So what has been it was not only the particular disinformation campaigns only designed for that to push the positive image for Russia. It's not necessarily that, but also to promote polarization within society, to promote nihilism and apathy among Georgian society, and as well as promote their own or the Russia-friendly political forces that are not openly are just pro-Russian, because the overwhelming majority of Georgian population is considering Russia as the number one enemy for Georgian statehood and as an occupier, but they are mostly targeting liberal democracies, targeting our Western partners. They are targeting different, the values in Georgia, and then what their main objective is to polarize society, radicalize public opinion, so and undermine Georgia's trust into the democratic institutions. So through this, I mean, they've been pretty successful in the past, and then currently they are much more. Their tactics is much more effective since Georgian Dream, Georgia's oligarchs-owned party, is also promoting very similar political narratives and a very similar line. So now we are facing in very difficult situation. We are facing very serious elections, since these elections are a choice between Western path of Georgia's development, democratic path of Georgian development, or the Russian-style kleptocratic autocracy.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Kutelia, why does the Georgian government not do anything about this blatant interference in its domestic political affairs?
Unfortunately, but Russia has one of the most prominent successes in post-Soviet countries where it tries to exercise its influence is Georgia, simply because they achieved the Russian style of state capture through its proxy oligarch and political forces. So the Georgian Dream itself is a informally ruled clan of kleptocrats and individuals associated with Bidzina Ivanishvili, who control every institution in Georgia, including judiciary, and they are serving the Russian interests. So by nature, they will not resist Russia because their interest lies in Russia. They, like umbilical cord, are connected to Russia. They are laundering a lot of Russian money, and source of their power and also source of their political viability is linked with Russia. That's why they are cheering formally and informally as well for Russian victory in Ukraine. So to portray that, yes, West is incapable of support democracies, so therefore we have to have a good relations with Russia, because otherwise it means that West is dragging us to the war. So that's the angle where Russia in information space also, on top of the capturing the institutions through Georgian Dream, interfering to manipulate the public opinion. So one of the major narrative Russia employs is that West is dragging us into the war. Look what they've done with Ukraine. They drag Ukraine into the war, and they abandoned the Ukraine. So if we do not want to be dragged, then we have to choose Georgian Dream. So this irrational fear-mongering is a very powerful tool, and as Datu said, plus they are physically demonstrating their presence through the occupied territories, through their military, and also now more and more visible presence of Russian special forces and security services on Georgian territory, while they are controlling most of the economic activities, increasing Georgia's dependence overly on Russian market, and also supporting bypassing sanctions that has been imposed on Russia. So largely Georgia is already is an economically and politically on a Russian orbit. So and the Georgian Dream, as I said, is a proxy of the Russian state, and it's copycats its structure within themselves, like a more mafia pyramid rather than the political entity. So therefore, they will not be, and they are not interested and will not resist Russian interference. Just the opposite. Their goal is to reversibly adjust Georgia on the Russian orbit and remove Western presence from Georgia, and through Georgia from broader in the region. To weaken Western presence in the South Caucasus, on the Black Sea, and also take a significant control over the so-called the middle corridor, the area that connects Black Sea to Caspian and Central Asia. And one of the economic dimensions that proves this theory is that now Georgian government awarded one of the most important strategic infrastructure, deep sea port Anaklia project, to the Chinese. It would have been very hard for them to give it to the Russians, but that's where authoritarian regimes' interests coincide. So bringing China in also, and Georgian government signing strategic partnership with China demonstrates this.
Thank you very much, Batu. Now, gentlemen, my last question for you all will be the most important for our audience. I will ask each of you to explain to our listeners why average Americans should care about the elections and Russian behavior in Georgia and Moldova. What are the stakes for the United States? Why does this matter for us in America? Mr. Ostaf, would you like to start?
Yes, well, in my understanding, there are two types of implications for the United States elections holding this year, and making sure that Russia doesn't take hold of our countries. So one is about direct implications, another one about indirect implications. So I will start with direct implications, and then let's see later on. I can maybe later on add on the indirect implications. So the first one is obviously Transnistria factor of various mining farms that are taking. Let's say, imagine the consumption of energy of the various mining farms in Transnistria is comparable to the consumption of energy of the second biggest city in Moldova, Belz. That means there is a lot of the mining factories activities going on. That they could be using these energy resources and human capital in order to influence the elections in the United States directly. Through various bots, but also false identities on different social networks and the like. That linked to that is, of course, the cryptocurrency, about generating the cryptocurrency that could be used as a illegal financial or illicit financial resources to influence the potential false identities which are operating on American soil to influence the election. So in a way, this specific arrangement is used by Russians in order to influence the elections in United States, and there is no way how directly current government, pro-Western government in Moldova can influence this. There are only indirect ways of controlling this issue. So imagine that there was going to be a pro-Russian government and the president coming later on, that could be multiplied. And then it could be substantially influencing the United States elections in the future. That would be one aspect.
Thank you very, very much. Mr. Pasha, could I ask you the same thing? Why does Russian interference in Moldovan affairs matter to Americans? Why should it matter?
I already mentioned the example of Belarus. So, this is what Russia does when it takes control of the countries around it. Doesn't matter with the force of its army, and we see that they are not that successful this way, but they took control of Belarus without any shot. And after that, they started to use Belarus for its invasion in Ukraine, for hybrid operations against neighborhood NATO countries. So any success Russia has in its hybrid extension just fuels its determination, its resolve to scale up and spill over what they achieved already. Moldova is, as I mentioned too, this testing ground for different technologies, strategies, and tactics to meddle, interfere in the democratic processes abroad. If they test it successfully here, if they manage to this method by actually falsifying our elections to get control of the part of the country, next what they will do, they will start to use Moldova against the West. Money laundering, sanctions evasion, and even recruitment of people, as we recently saw in France, in Paris, when some Moldovan nationals were hired by Russian operatives and sent there to stimulate conflicts between Jewish population and Muslims in France. This is a small example, but this is exactly what Russia does when they take control of other countries. They explore our connectivity to the Western world to subvert the Western world. So in the end, any of successes like that just bring United States closer to the non-Cold War but open war with Russia, because it just stimulates this obsession of Putin for extension of his influence all around Europe.
Thank you very, very much for that. I'd like to ask Minister Sikharulidze again the same question. Why is what's happening in Georgia matters to the United States, especially with regards to Russian interference in your domestic affairs?
What happens in Georgia sometimes, in most cases, it's more than what happens, or more. It's not only about Georgia, but it's bigger than Georgia. So, if we take a more bigger look, uh, uh, continuing the project of building Europe whole, free, and at peace is in interest of United States. It will provide entire continent with peace and security and stability, and it will be beneficial for United States, as it was beneficial to implement Truman's doctrine after World War II, or it was beneficial to implement the Reagan doctrine after which ended Cold War and liberated over 300 million people from the communist oppression. So, but it was not only about these nations, but it was also about the United States, and the United States benefit from the security and stability in Europe, and then the project of building Europe whole, free, and at peace is in interest of the United States, since the region is more peaceful, more stable, with the less opportunities for the radical powers to rise and to create pockets of instability, either in Eastern Europe, or it will be also will be influencing on Middle East too. Secondly, of course, the Batu already mentioned this project of the strategic connectivity, which is connected with the not only the port of Anaklia, but also it's a bigger concept of the connecting Europe and Central Asia through the energy connection, all the energy infrastructure connection, transportation, also the informational connection, bypassing Russia and also creating opportunity for the better development for this part of the world, and also that will provide also additional economic opportunities. So I think that they are the third and the third and one of the not less important of this is that United States is well regarded by freedom-loving people around the world because of its commitment to other nations' freedom and security. And I think that it is also in the interest of United States to have a much more secure and stable world. Attack on democracies, on the backslide of democracies in either in Georgia or in Moldova or in Ukraine, or the failure of democracy and freedom in these countries also will have negative influence on worldwide. Will have negative influence worldwide and will have influence negatively. Will have negative influence.
Thank you very much, Minister Sikharulidze. Ambassador Kutelia, you get the last word.
I think most of the arguments have been said. There are three major baskets why our region in general is important for United States. So this is a moral and reputational. Another is economic and the trade, and the third one is security. So in all three components, U.S. will be affected. What will happen in our region? Starting with moral component, again, yes, all the post-Soviet captive nations or other nations who are under the oppression of authoritarian governments or authoritarian neighbors, they view United States as the only power that can generate and galvanize other democracies in support of democratic aspiration of those nations. So abandoning those nations or some kind of isolation from these processes will damage the reputation of United States as a provider for the global democratic stability. Another important component is that if authoritarians will win in our region, it automatically emboldens other authoritarians in Indo-Pacific, in the Middle East, everywhere. So eventually it will boomerang back to the U.S. national security interest. So that's why this is its U.S. national security interest as well. Plus, Dato mentioned Europe, Holland, Free and Peace. This is an unfinished project that unfortunately stopped on the Black Sea. And I think expanding Euro-Atlantic institutions, NATO and EU particularly, on the Black Sea is in U.S. core interest, because U.S. will be benefiting economically with increased democracy in the region, but also increased access to the strategically important regions like Central Asia for very important critical minerals that now are under the predatory interest of Chinese because of the Russians' inability to exercise their power in Central Asia. So, in another word, having foothold in our region and emboldening democracy will minimize the ability of China to manipulate global economy through their access to the rare earth metals or critical minerals. And plus, security-wise, we've seen with Russian invasion in Ukraine that U.S. military industry and NATO as a military organization with the U.S. leadership is the only remaining international security institution that can provide defensive shield or defensive umbrella for democracies and can provide a formula how to be resilient against authoritarianism. So all these three components in concert really affects U.S. interests globally, as well as makes quite obvious that our national interests are in 100% synchronized with the U.S. interests in the region. So I think that all those considerations will play important role of keeping and even modernizing more holistic strategic approach. And we've seen some signals of it. And I'll stop here. U.S. Senate recently adopted a bill, Black Sea Strategic Act of the Black Sea Security Act, which is a very well balanced and all-encompassing document. I think now what we would like to see, and it's in U.S. strategic interest, particular actions from the executive side on those legislative initiatives.
Well, thank you very much. And Mr. Sergehi Ostaf, Mr. Valeriu Pasa, Minister Datu Sikharulidze, and Ambassador Batu Kutelia, on behalf of the Foreign Policy Research Institute, I would like to thank you for appearing on our podcast and providing our audience with this firsthand knowledge of how Russian political warfare operations are done against your countries. And the best of luck to you all. Speaking of our audience, as always, we want to thank our Overheard podcast audience for listening. If you enjoy these podcasts, please visit the Foreign Policy Research Institute website at fpri.org to subscribe to our mailing list and to learn of future podcasts. Please also consider becoming a member of FPRI and donating to it to support our efforts to provide the public and policymakers with fact-driven, nonpartisan analysis about the most pressing foreign policy and national security issues facing the United States today. Thank you for listening again, and goodbye.